Kirk Hammett was not the one who created Metallica. When he entered the band in 1983, the machine had already begun to move. Metallica at that time already had a reputation in the underground metal scene, already had its own sound, and already had a founding guitarist before him, Dave Mustaine. Hammett did not step into an empty space. He stepped into a system that already existed. Within that system, the roles of the members had almost been clearly defined. So James Hetfield wrote the heavy riffs that shaped the sound of the band, while Lars Ulrich controlled the structure and direction of the songs. Metallica was built on speed, discipline, and intensity. Guitar solos had never been the center of that music. But over the years, there has been a familiar moment in Metallica's performances. The riff stops in a brief silence, and the space of the song opens up. When the solo begins, the guitar does not attack the audience with the same anger as the riffs before it. Instead, it moves through the structure of the song, melodic, sharp, and full of emotion. You can hear it in Enter Sandman, in Fade to Black, or in One. Those solos did not change Metallica, but they reveal something more interesting. In a band built like a machine, Kirk Hammett found a way to place his own voice inside it. And that is the central question of this story. How does a guitarist step into a band already famous for its anger and discipline, and still keep his own individuality? Kirk Hammett was born on November 18, 1962, in San Francisco, a city that in the 1960s and 1970s was becoming one of the most important centers of rock culture in the United States. His family carried two lineages, Filipino from his mother's side and Irish from his father's side. That mixture created a fairly ordinary working-class California household. But outside the front door, a musical world was changing very quickly. San Francisco at that time was not only the city of hippies and psychedelic rock. By the late 1970s, it had begun to form a young, aggressive metal community that existed almost entirely outside the structures of the music industry. Teenagers growing up in that environment did not just listen to music. They learned to play it with increasing intensity and speed. Hammett was quickly drawn into that world. One of his greatest influences was Jimi Hendrix, who had turned the electric guitar into a nearly limitless tool of expression. But alongside Hendrix, Hammett was also strongly influenced by European hard rock guitarists, particularly Michael Schenker. From bands such as UFO and Thin Lizzy, he learned how to combine speed, melody, and stage energy. Those influences gradually shaped Hammett's guitar style. Fast, sharp, but always with a clear melodic element. This would later become one of his recognizable signatures in metal. By the late 1970s, as the new wave of heavy metal began to form in California, Hammett entered the Bay Area underground scene. In 1979, he and several friends formed the band Exodus. During that period, Exodus was one of the first bands in what would later be called Bay Area thrash metal, a musical movement that combined the speed of punk with the heaviness of heavy metal. Within the local metal community, Hammett quickly built a reputation. He became known as a guitarist with strong technique. He's always pursuing guitar sounds that were heavier and sharper. But more importantly, he was an active part of the underground scene. Small shows, cramped clubs, and a community of young musicians trying to push heavy metal further than it had ever gone before. By the early 1980s, the Bay Area had begun to produce a new generation of bands. And in that underground world, Kirk Hammett was not just a fan of metal, he had become a part of it. In early 1983, Metallica was still only a young band within the underground metal scene of the United States. But the speed of their development had already begun to surpass many other groups in the same scene. Demo tapes were being exchanged throughout the tape trading community. Their shows were drawing increasingly larger audiences, and the band was preparing to enter the studio to record their debut album. However, just before the recording process began, Metallica faced a very significant internal decision. In April 1983, the band fired Dave Mustaine. Mustaine was not only the guitarist of the band, he was also one of its founding members, someone who had helped write many of the riffs and songs in the early period. But personal tensions, particularly issues with alcohol and internal conflicts, eventually led the remaining members to decide that the band could not continue with that lineup. The decision was made very quickly, and as soon as Mustaine left, Metallica needed a new guitarist almost immediately. In San Francisco, Kirk Hammett was playing guitar in the band Exodus, one of the groups rising within the Bay Area thrash metal scene. Hammett already knew Metallica from the underground community, and the members of the band were well aware of his guitar abilities. One day, Hammett received a phone call from Lars Ulrich. Metallica was looking for a new guitarist, and they wanted Hammett to join. Everything happened within just a few days. There was no long audition process. There was no time for prolonged consideration. Hammett agreed, left Exodus, and flew to New York City to meet the band. When he arrived, Metallica was already preparing to enter the studio to record their debut album, Kill 'Em All. That meant Hammett was not simply joining a new band. He had to step directly into the recording process of an album, with very little time to prepare. The pressure was enormous. First of all, he was replacing a founding guitarist who had helped write many of Metallica's early songs. In the eyes of many underground fans, that position was not an ordinary vacancy. Second, Metallica at that time was rising very quickly in the metal scene. Their live shows were known for speed, precision, and extremely high intensity. To keep up with the band, Hammett had to relearn the entire set list in a very short time. Songs that were played at what was almost an extreme speed for that period. But there was one important thing about the way Hammett entered Metallica. He did not try to replace Dave Mustaine by competing with the band's past. He also did not try to impose his own style immediately. Instead, Hammett approached the new role in a different way. He listened. He relearned the songs. He adapted to the system that already existed. In those early days, Kirk Hammett did not enter Metallica as someone trying to dominate. He entered as someone who had to find his place inside a machine already running at full speed. When Kirk Hammett joined Metallica in 1983, he entered an environment where everything was measured by intensity. Thrash metal at that time was forming as a reaction against the polished sound of 1970s hard rock and the rising glam metal scene. The speed had to be faster, the sound had to be heavier, and guitarists often tried to prove themselves through increasingly extreme technical ability. In that context, the path Hammett chose was rather unusual. From his late teenage years in San Francisco, he had already sought out a local guitar teacher, Joe Satriani. At that time, Satriani was not yet the globally famous guitar virtuoso he would later become. But within the Bay Area musician community, he was already known as someone with a very deep foundation in technique and music theory. Hammett began studying with Satriani in the early 1980s before joining Metallica. What is notable is that he did not stop after becoming a member of a band that was rapidly gaining attention. Even as Metallica began attracting greater recognition, Hammett continued returning for lessons. Satriani's lessons did not focus only on playing faster. He helped Hammett understand how to build phrasing, how a guitarist arranges notes into meaningful musical sentences, much like the way a singer uses a voice. Satriani also emphasized controlling rhythm within a solo, how to create a climax, and how to guide the listener through a guitar passage rather than simply running through notes at high speed. This was particularly important in thrash metal, where lead guitar could easily become a chain of fast notes lacking structure. Over time, Hammett began to develop a recognizable lead guitar style. One of the most distinctive elements was his use of the wah pedal to create guitar lines that feel in constant motion. This sound helped his solos stand out against Metallica's dense riff foundation. Alongside that were high-speed pentatonic runs, a technique originating from blues and hard rock, but accelerated to match the pace of thrash metal. What mattered was that Hammett often connected these runs with clear, melodic phrases, giving his solos both speed and emotional expression. That combination became a defining element in Metallica's music. James Hetfield's riffs were often heavy, direct, and extremely precise. Hammett's solos, by contrast, carried more expressive elements, almost like a voice responding to the rigid structure of the song. But the most important thing in this period was not only guitar technique, it was attitude. In many rock bands, a new guitarist often tries to establish his place by changing the music or imposing his personality immediately. Hammett approached Metallica differently. He understood that the band already had its own structure, its own history, and very strong personalities. So instead of competing with the band's past or trying to prove himself better than the previous guitarist, Hammett focused on learning. He learned how to play within Metallica's system. He learned how to build solos that fit the structure of the songs. And he continued learning guitar even as he stood on increasingly larger stages. In a rock world where ego is often placed above everything else, Hammett's approach was quite rare, and he did not build his position by proving that he was the best. He built it on a simpler philosophy: learning over ego. After the early years of adaptation, Kirk Hammett began to find a clear position for himself within Metallica. This did not happen by changing the structure of the band, but by understanding how that structure worked. From very early on, Metallica operated within a fairly clear system. Their music was not a competition between members, but a relatively stable division of roles. At the center was James Hetfield, who was seen as the architect of the riffs that defined Metallica's sound. Hetfield's guitar parts were heavy, precise, and highly rhythmic, becoming the foundation of most of the band's songs. Alongside him, Lars Ulrich held the role of structural arranger. Ulrich was deeply involved in deciding how songs were constructed, from rhythm and transitions to the way the different sections of a song connected with one another. Within that structure, Kirk Hammett took on the third role, lead guitarist. His task was not to write the main riffs or control the structure of the songs. Hammett's role was to bring expressive elements, solos and lead guitar passages that expanded the emotional space of Metallica's music. Hammett's solo style gradually became very recognizable. One of its most distinctive features was the use of the wah pedal, creating guitar lines that feel constantly in motion and almost as if they are speaking to the listener. Alongside this were high-speed pentatonic runs, which combined with phrasing that carried a clear melodic quality. The result was a style that was both aggressive and emotionally rich, melodic, yet still fitting the intensity of thrash metal. That role began to become clear in Metallica's second album, Ride the Lightning, 1984. In the song Fade to Black, Hammett performed one of his first famous solos, a guitar passage that develops slowly, filled with emotion, and completely different from the direct attack of thrash riffs. 2 years later, Metallica released Master of Puppets, 1986, an album many consider the peak of thrash metal. In the song Master of Puppets, Hammett's solo became an important part of the song's structure, bringing a melodic moment in the middle of a storm of riffs and drums. By And Justice for All, 1988, Hammett's style continued to develop. In the song One, his solo played the role of building the climax for the entire composition, from the slow guitar passages at the beginning to the high-speed lead section at the end. The balance between riffs and solos reached global popularity with Metallica's 1991 album, Metallica. The song Enter Sandman became one of the most famous rock songs in the world, and Hammett's solo, written rather quickly during the recording process, became one of the most recognizable guitar melodies of the decade. Through these albums, Hammett's role in Metallica gradually became clear. He was not the one who built the structural framework of Metallica's music, but he was the one who brought color to it. In a band famous for heaviness and discipline, Kirk Hammett found a space of his own, a place where the guitar could be both aggressive and melodic. And it was within that space that he began to find his voice. In the early 1990s, Metallica had reached a position that very few metal bands had ever achieved. The 1991 album Metallica took them from underground thrash metal straight into stadiums and global radio. Songs like Enter Sandman and Nothing Else Matters turned Metallica into a phenomenon that went beyond the boundaries of metal. But that success also brought a major question for the band. Where would they go next? In the years that followed, Metallica began to change noticeably. The extreme thrash speed of the 1980s was gradually replaced by songs with slower structures, heavier grooves, and influences from hard rock and blues. This shift became most evident in the albums Load, 1996, and Reload, 1997. Metallica's music at this point sounded very different from the era of Master of Puppets. The riffs no longer ran at extreme speed, but were often built around groove and a broader sonic space. This also forced Kirk Hammett to adjust his approach to lead guitar. During the thrash period, Hammett's solos often relied heavily on speed and fast pentatonic runs to match the intensity of the songs. But as Metallica's music slowed down and took on more blues color, Hammett began to expand his approach. The solos became more flexible, sometimes shorter, but focused more on phrasing and emotion. This can be heard in songs such as Until It Sleeps or Fuel, where the lead guitar no longer served only as a moment of climax, but also contributed to building the overall sonic color of the song. However, this shift was not only happening in the music. By the mid-1990s, Metallica had also changed its image. The members cut their hair, changed their clothing style, and began appearing with a look closer to alternative rock than traditional thrash metal. For many loyal fans from the 1980s, this was a shock. Controversies quickly emerged within the metal community. Some believed Metallica had abandoned its thrash roots, while others saw it as the natural evolution of a band that did not want to repeat its past. Through all these changes, Kirk Hammett's position remained relatively stable. He was not the one leading the band's new direction, but he also did not resist it. Instead, Hammett did what he had done since the day he joined Metallica: adapt to the band's musical system and find a way to place his guitar voice inside it. That flexibility allowed Hammett to survive through many different phases of Metallica, from the high-speed thrash metal of the 1980s to the heavier, groove-driven hard rock of the 1990s. And it reveals an important aspect of his career. Kirk Hammett is not only the guitarist of a band, he is a guitarist who learned how to change along with that band. By the end of the 1990s, Metallica was no longer just a successful metal band. They had become a massive organization with global tours, millions of albums sold, and increasing pressure from both inside and outside the band. But that scale also came with internal instability. In 2001, one of the biggest changes occurred when Jason Newsted left the band. Newsted had joined Metallica in 1986, right after the death of Cliff Burton, and for more than a decade, he had been an important part of the lineup. His departure was not only a personnel change, but also reflected tensions that had been building within the band for many years. Shortly afterward, Metallica faced an even more serious crisis. In 2001, James Hetfield entered a rehabilitation program for alcohol and related issues. This caused the band to nearly stop operating for a long period of time, and the future of Metallica became uncertain. That entire period of turmoil was later documented in the film Metallica. Some Kind of Monster, a rare look inside one of the world's biggest bands as they struggled with personal, creative, and psychological problems. In that film, the conflicts between members become clearly visible, particularly between Hetfield and Lars Ulrich. Arguments about music, control, and the direction of the band sometimes became extremely tense. In that environment, Kirk Hammett's position became rather unique. Hammett was rarely the person at the center of the conflicts. In many internal discussions, he often took on the role of a mediator, someone who tried to keep conversations calmer when other strong personalities began to clash. In Some Kind of Monster, Hammett often appears more as an observer than a participant in arguments. He listens more than he speaks, and when he does speak, he usually tries to ease the situation rather than push the conflict further. This reflects an important aspect of Hammett's personality. In a band famous for strong and sometimes difficult personalities, Kirk Hammett has almost always been the member with the least drama. He is not someone seeking power within the structure of the band, nor someone trying to control its direction. Yet that stability has become an important factor in Metallica's survival. Because in moments when the band stood close to breaking apart, sometimes what was needed was not a stronger leader, but someone who could keep everything in balance. Outside the stage of Metallica, Kirk Hammett's world looks very different. While many rock stars build their image around the chaos of touring life, Hammett has long had rather quiet personal passions. Interests not directly related to thrash metal, but ones that reveal much about the person behind the guitar. One of his greatest passions is classic horror culture. Since childhood in San Francisco, Hammett had been fascinated by the monster and horror films of early Hollywood. Those black and white movies with characters like Frankenstein, Dracula, or strange creatures from the cinema of the 1930s and 1940s created an imaginary world that he remained connected to for many years. That fascination did not stop at simply watching films. Over time, Hammett began collecting posters, props, and memorabilia related to the history of horror cinema. His collection gradually became so large that it is considered one of the most notable horror memorabilia collections in the rock world. This passion eventually became a personal project when Hammett published the book, Too Much Horror Business, a compilation of images and artifacts from his collection. The book is not merely a simple catalog, but also a way for Hammett to share part of the creative world that had influenced his imagination since his teenage years. But horror culture is not Hammett's only passion. Like many great guitarists in rock history, he also has a deep love for the instruments he plays. Over the years, Hammett has built one of the most notable vintage guitar collections in the rock world. Within that collection are several iconic instruments: Gibson Flying V models, many vintage Les Paul guitars, and instruments associated with different periods in the history of rock. For Hammett, each guitar is not only a musical tool, but also part of a longer story about the evolution of the electric guitar. What is interesting is that Hammett rarely speaks about these collections in a boastful way. They exist as personal interests, small worlds separate from the intensity of Metallica. And that reflects a familiar aspect of his personality. While Metallica is a band built on energy, conflict, and very strong personalities, Kirk Hammett has long found balance in quieter passions. He is not only the guitarist standing in the noise of a massive metal band. He is also a collector, someone who searches for history, images, and the stories hidden behind the objects he loves. In the history of Metallica, the roles of the members have always been viewed quite clearly. Kirk Hammett is not the founder of the band. He is also not the person who wrote most of the riffs that defined Metallica's sound. And he has never been the one leading the structure or direction of the band. Those roles have long been associated with James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich. But that does not mean Hammett's position in Metallica is small. Over many decades, he has played a very specific and very important role. First of all, Hammett is the one who shaped the sound of Metallica's guitar solos. In a band famous for heavy riffs and precise rhythm, his lead guitar passages bring something different: melody, expression, and movement. The solos in songs like Fade to Black, One, or Enter Sandman are not merely improvised guitar parts. They become emotional moments within the tightly structured framework of Metallica's music. In addition, Hammett has also been one of the most stable elements in the band's history. While Metallica has gone through many periods of internal tension, stylistic change, and personal crises, he has rarely become the center of conflict. Instead, Hammett has existed as a balancing force, a member capable of adapting to the band's different phases without needing to change his own nature. More importantly, Hammett helped bring melodic expression into thrash metal, in a genre often known for speed and direct aggression. His solos demonstrated that lead guitar could still carry melody and emotion without reducing the intensity of the music. Therefore, when looking back at the history of Metallica, Kirk Hammett's legacy does not lie in the fact that he changed the band. Metallica has always been a band built on intensity, discipline, and very clear structures. But within that structure, Kirk Hammett found a space of his own. Not by breaking the system, not by competing with the strong personalities around him, but by doing something simpler and harder. He found his voice inside it. In the history of Metallica, many stories often revolve around large personalities. The massive riffs of James Hetfield, the structural decisions and direction shaped by Lars Ulrich, the internal upheavals, the creative conflicts, and the periods when the band seemed close to falling apart. In a band like that, it is easy to think that only those at the center of power shape its history. But the story of Kirk Hammett reveals another path. He did not create Metallica. He did not lead Metallica, and he never tried to become the center of the band. Instead, Hammett built his legacy by finding a clear role and developing it over many decades. Each time a solo rises in songs like Fade to Black, One, or Enter Sandman, the listener does not simply hear a guitarist playing. They hear a voice that has existed inside Metallica for more than 40 years. A voice that does not try to overpower the machine, but learns how to live inside it. And perhaps that is the answer to the question of this story. Kirk Hammett did not become a legend by changing Metallica. He became a legend by finding his space inside a band that had already become too large to change. If you enjoy stories about the artists who shaped the history of rock, not only through the noise of fame, but through the long journey behind it, follow Icons and Legacies. Because sometimes, the greatest legacies in music do not come from the person standing at the center of the stage. They come from those who learned how to find their voice in the noise of history